In 1861, a 4-year-old girl in London died in her own bedroom. No signs of violence, no illness anyone could name. Her parents were wealthy. Her room was beautiful. And that was the problem. The walls of that room were painted in the most fashionable color of the entire Victorian era, a deep, rich, glowing green. The kind of green that made a home look expensive. The kind of green that was in royal palaces, in ball gowns, in children's toys. And in almost every single one of those objects, there was enough arsenic to kill a grown man. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how an entire society decorated itself into a slow, invisible poisoning, and why the man who died an ocean away on a rock in the middle of the South Atlantic might have been killed by the very same color.
This isn't some forgotten conspiracy theory. Chemists confirmed it. Doctors documented it. Newspapers warned about it for decades, and almost nobody listened. Because this color wasn't rare. It was everywhere. It was in the wallpaper of nurseries, the fabric of dresses, the paint on children's toys, even in candy. If you lived in a middle or upper-class home in the 1800s, there is a real chance you were breathing this poison every single night while you slept.
By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how this pigment was made, why it became the most desired color in the world, how it silently poisoned thousands of families, and why one specific case involving one of history's most famous men is still debated by scientists today. In 1775, a Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele created a pigment unlike anything the world had seen. A green so vivid, so luminous, it looked almost alive under candlelight. It became known as Scheele's green, and later, an even more intense version called Paris green. The problem was the recipe. This color was made using copper arsenite. In simple terms, it was manufactured using arsenic, one of the most lethal poisons known to humans. But in the 1800s, nobody cared about that. They cared that it was beautiful and that it was cheap to produce at scale. And once the wealthy fell in love with this color, it stopped being a paint choice. It became an obsession. Within a few decades, this green wasn't just on walls. It was dyed into ball gowns, worn for hours in warm, crowded rooms. It was printed onto children's toys. It was used to color candy wrappers, and in some documented cases, the candy itself. Wallpaper manufacturers loved it because it didn't fade like other pigments. Families would paper an entire room, sometimes an entire house, in this single vibrant shade, never knowing that with every change in humidity, with every scrape of a chair against the wall, they were releasing invisible arsenic dust into the air they breathed. And that dust didn't just sit there. It had somewhere to go.
Doctors in the 1860s started noticing a pattern. Families in green wallpapered rooms complaining of headaches, nausea, skin irritation, and in the worst cases, sudden death, especially in children, whose smaller bodies couldn't handle repeated exposure. The wallpaper would grow slightly damp in humid weather. Certain mold species, when they fed on the arsenic compounds in the paper, released a toxic gas called trimethylarsenine directly into the room. In other words, in the right conditions,
the wallpaper didn't just contain poison, it could breathe it out. Some historians believe this exact mechanism killed that 4-year-old girl in London in 1861. But the story doesn't end in England. It follows one specific man to one of the most remote islands on Earth. In 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died in exile on the island of St. Helena. For nearly 2 centuries, historians debated the cause. Stomach cancer was the official record. But in the 1980s, scientists tested strands of Napoleon's preserved hair and found arsenic levels dramatically higher than normal. Then researchers went further. They examined the wallpaper from Longwood House, where Napoleon spent his final years. The pattern on that wallpaper was green. Vivid, expensive, fashionable green. The most likely explanation isn't that someone poisoned Napoleon on purpose. It's that the walls around him, in a damp, humid island climate, were slowly releasing the same toxic gas that was killing children in London bedrooms at the exact same time in history. The most powerful man in Europe may have been killed by the same interior decorating trend that was quietly poisoning ordinary families an ocean away.
Here's what makes this story worth remembering. It wasn't a war, a plague, or an enemy that caused this. It was a color, a trend people chose because it looked beautiful, without any way of knowing what it was doing to them. And it raises an uncomfortable question about our own homes today. We assume that if something is being sold to us, it must be safe. The people buying that wallpaper in 1860 assumed exactly the same thing. It took decades, hundreds of documented illnesses, and the quiet deaths of children in their own bedrooms before this color was finally phased out of production. Today, that same shade of green just looks like an antique curiosity in old paintings and preserved Victorian rooms. But it's a reminder that the most dangerous things in history rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they just look like the most beautiful room in the house. If this is the kind of history that never made it into your textbooks, this channel exists for exactly that. Every week, we uncover the hidden side of history that most people never learn. Subscribe now, because the next story we're about to tell you is even harder to believe.